Hey everyone and welcome back. Now in today's video we'll be discussing about the dev agent mode in console. Now before we go ahead and discuss more in detail about that, let's look into the high level overview about a typical learning approach based workflow whenever you're learning a new technology. So whenever you learn any new technology, be it console, Terraform, Linux, etc., you start from very basics and initially you keep it very simple. So once you're comfortable with the basic of any new technology, then you go more in depth about the aspects like security, high availability and others. So let's take an example of Linux, where on the left hand side you have a Linux based on dev approach, and on the right hand side you have Linux based on prod approach, which is production. So dev is development, prod is production. So initially whenever you're learning Linux, for example, let's say you're learning basic Linux commands, you're learning about installation of Linux, understanding file system and so on, you go with the dev approach. So in the dev approach, you do not really care much about the security, firewalls and so on. However, once you're comfortable with the dev approach, then you can switch to prod, where you can go ahead and learn about more in detail about the best practices of a technology, the server hardening, the kernel tuning and so on. So this same methodology applies even for console. Now, whenever you are learning console, one of the initial things that you can do is you can go ahead and initialize the console in the development mode. So the dev server mode in console is useful for local development, testing and exploration. Now, one important part to remember is that this dev server mode is not very secure, and also it is a in-memory mode. So in case if you mess up, all you have to do is you have to go ahead and stop and start console and your state is started from fresh. So let's do one thing. First, in the initial set of videos, we'll be making use of console within the dev mode, and once you're comfortable with the basics, then we'll also be using the console in prod mode. So again, it's not really called as prod mode, but just for our reference, we are using a dev and prod mode over here. Now I am connected to our server where console is installed. So in order to start console in dev mode, all you have to do is you have to do a console agent followed by -dev, and that's about it. Your console is started. Now if you go a bit up, it basically shows you the node name. So the node name is basically the host name. The host name is console01 that we had set, and if you'll see it, the server is true. We'll be discussing more in detail on what exactly this means. One more important part to remember here is that it is also showing you the port where it is running. So primarily the port of 8500 is being used. So let me quickly show you here. So if you quickly do a netstat-ntlp, here you will see that the console is running on multiple ports. You have 8500, 8502, 8600, 8300 and so on. So as we progress further, we'll be discussing more in detail on what each one of the port is really associated with. One of the interesting one and most important one for today's video is 8500, where we can go ahead and load the GUI of console here. Now if you copy the IP address of the console server, let me paste it here followed by 8500. You see it is basically showing that the site cannot be reached. Now in case if you would had run this command within your laptop, and if you would had loaded the localhost 8500 or 127.0.0.1 8500, it would work perfectly. Now the thing why it is not working here is that the GUI and other aspects are associated with the localhost port. However, we are trying to connect via the public IP of the server, and this is one of the reasons why it is not working. So what we want console is to also listen on the public IP so that we can go ahead and initiate the request to it. So from the first tab, let's quickly do a Control-C, and this time we'll also specify client is equal to, let's say, 0000. That's great. So from a different tab, when you quickly do a netstat-ntlp, here you will see that the 8500 is now not associated with the local host, which is 127.0.0.1. So now if you quickly do a refresh, you should be able to see the console GUI up and running. So this GUI, in fact, it has multiple features. So you have one related to services, the key value, ACL, and so on, which we'll be discussing in great detail in the upcoming videos. However, the primary aim for today was to learn the basics of the console in the dev mode and also the GUI related aspects. Now, let me quickly show you one interesting thing about the dev mode. So let's quickly open up the key value here. So let's click on create, and within the key, let's call it as demo. Now, within the value here, there will be multiple ways. You have JSON, HCL, and YAML. Let's use YAML. And within the value, let's just say admin and password. I'll go ahead and save it. Alright, so some data is stored. So let's say you are experimenting with console and you have messed up. Now I still remember many years back when I was learning Linux in more detail, specifically related to the area of kernel, there are chances that if you're going ahead and loading some modules, things can get little messy and your operating system fails to boot. So what you have to do is, if you have taken a snapshot, you can easily restore a snapshot. Now in a similar way, let's say you're working with console, you have messed up something. Now since you are in the dev mode, you want to restore to the perfectly working condition. So all you have to do here is you have to do a Control C and start the console agent in dev mode, and that's about it. All of the original configuration would be back. So let me quickly show you. So as of now, we have made some configuration here. So let's do a Control C. So here you see the agent has exited, and let's start the console agent yet again. Alright, so now if I refresh the page, you see all of the data and modification that we had done throughout the process is removed, and now you are in the original condition of console. So even if you want to go ahead and try messing things up, this is the best way for learning, and this is the reason why it is also called as the console dev mode. Now, before we conclude, one very important part to remember here is that this specific URL, since this is a public IP, this 8500 port, anyone, any user from the internet will be able to access this specific page. So it is very important that you restrict it at the firewall level. Now within the DigitalOcean, what really happens is that by default a firewall is not associated. In fact, let me quickly show you this. So if you look into the firewall, there is no firewall that is associated with our server, and this is one of the reasons why all of this specific port like 8500, port 22 is open for all. So this is something that we do not really want. Now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and quickly create a firewall. So within the manage here, you have an option of networking. So within networking, you go ahead and go to the firewall tab. Let's go ahead and quickly create a firewall. Let's call it as console server. And the type, I'll say all TCP. In fact, let's also do a all UDP. And here what I'll do, I'll quickly fetch the IP address of my ISP through which I'm connecting, and I'll add it as part of the firewall. So I'll remove all IPv4 and all IPv6. I'll add my IP address. Now outbound rule will let it be same and apply to droplet. So which droplet we want to apply? So I want to apply it to console. So this is the console 01 that I want to apply. I'll click on create firewall. Alright, so now what has happened? The specific firewall rule has been applied to our console server. So now no one will be able to connect except our IP address. So let's quickly do a refresh to see if things are working. And yes, things are working as expected. Now one downside here is specifically related to users who have dynamic IP. So if you restart your router, chances are that your IP address will change. So in that case, you will have to update your firewall rule. So that is a better way in case you have a dynamic IPs. For those who have static IP addresses for their ISPs, you do not really need to worry there. So at a high level overview, in today's video, we explored the basics of the dev agent mode in console. We looked into the advantages. Now, since it is a in-memory, if you just close and start the console again, all of the data and all of the configuration that you had done will be removed and the console would be back to its original state. So this is one of the best approaches for testing the console. So that's about it for today's video.